The mirror was 8 feet tall and framed in gilt. Baroque, excessive, the kind of mirror that belonged in a palace or a nightmare. It dominated the far wall of Marguerite Esson's dressing room at the Royal Theatre, Haymarket, and it was the first thing Poirot looked at when we entered. Not the body, the mirror. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, looked at the body. One could hardly avoid it. Marguerite Esson, the Marguerite Esson, the most celebrated actress of her generation, whose Hedda Gabler had made grown men weep and whose Lady Macbeth had given the theatre critic of the times actual nightmares, lay on the chaise longue in a pose of almost theatrical repose. Her dark hair fanned across the silk cushion. Her gown, emerald velvet, pooled on the floor. Her right arm hung loose, and beneath the dangling fingers, a crystal tumbler lay on its side, a residue of amber liquid darkening the carpet. She looked as though she had fallen asleep. She had not fallen asleep. "Cyanide," said Inspector Miller, a stocky man with the complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors and the temperament of someone who wished everyone else would do the same. "At least, that's what it smells like. Dr. Partridge will confirm, but I've smelled it before. Bitter almonds. Unmistakable." "Not everyone can detect the odor," Poirot murmured, still studying the mirror. "It is a genetic trait. You are fortunate, Inspector." "Fortunate isn't the word I'd use at midnight on a Tuesday. The theater manager found her an hour ago. She didn't come out for her curtain call. The understudy had to finish the performance. They assumed she'd taken ill. When they broke down the dressing room door, they found this. The door was locked. From the inside, bolted. The windows are sealed. This room is below street level. Semi-basement, no other way in or out." "A locked room," I said. "A locked room with a dead woman and a glass of what appears to be poisoned whiskey," Miller confirmed. "Suicide, on the face of it. She's been erratic lately. Everyone in the company says so. Missed rehearsals, argued with the director, threatened to quit the production. Her dresser says she'd been drinking heavily for weeks." "And yet you telephoned Hercule Poirot," Poirot said, turning at last from the mirror. "At midnight, which tells me you do not believe it is suicide." Miller shifted uncomfortably. "I telephoned you because of this." He crossed to the dressing table, a cluttered landscape of grease paint, powder pots, brushes, and the accumulated debris of a working actress, and pointed to a folded note propped against the mirror's base. Poirot took it, handling it by the edges with a care that was almost reverential. The note was written on the theater's own stationery, in a hand I recognized from the playbills as Marguerite Esson's. Bold, dramatic, the handwriting of a woman who had never done anything quietly. "I cannot bear it any longer. The thing behind the mirror knows what I have done. Let it end here." "A suicide note," Miller said. "Clear enough." Except, Poirot finished, "that it does not say what the thing behind the mirror is. It does not say what she has done, and it does not say she intends to kill herself." "Exactly. It reads more like, I don't know, a confession or a warning, and there's something else." Miller lowered his voice, though we were the only living persons in the room. "The whiskey. Her dresser, a woman named Rose Harding, swears that Esson didn't drink whiskey, never touched the stuff. Said it reminded her of her father. If she was going to poison herself, why use a drink she despised?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. That particular gleam, I knew it well. It was the light that appeared when the little grey cells found a thread to pull. "You are right to call me, Inspector. This is not suicide. This is murder made to look like suicide, which is an altogether more interesting proposition." He moved now to the body, studying it without touching. His gaze traveled from the face, peaceful, composed, the eyes closed, to the hands, the gown, the positioning of the limbs. "She was arranged," he said softly. "Observe the hands, Hastings. A woman who has just drunk poison. She does not fold one hand across her stomach and let the other drape artfully over the edge of the chaise. She clutches. She thrashes. Cyanide is fast, yes, but it is not gentle. There would be signs of distress. Instead, we see serenity. She was posed after death. But the door was bolted from inside, Miller protested. Yes, that is the problem. Poirot straightened and looked once more at the great mirror. Tell me, Inspector, this mirror, it has always been here? As long as anyone remembers. The theatre was rebuilt in 1898. The mirror was part of the original dressing room. Poirot walked to it. He ran his fingers along the gilt frame. Top, sides, bottom. He pressed, he tapped, he leaned close, examining the glass itself, then the wall behind the frame. Hastings, come here. I joined him. He pointed to the bottom left corner of the frame, where the gilt met the wall. There, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, was a gap, perhaps half an inch wide, where the frame did not quite sit flush against the plaster. A draught, Poirot said. Feel it. I placed my hand near the gap. He was right. A faint but unmistakable current of air breathed from behind the mirror. Inspector, Poirot said, I believe this mirror conceals a door. Miller stared. A hidden door? In a theatre dressing room? Theatres are full of secrets, Inspector. Trapdoors, hidden passages, false walls. They are built for illusion. And illusion, it is the natural ally of the murderer. It took 20 minutes and a stagehand with a crowbar to confirm Poirot's suspicion. The great mirror, when its concealed hinges were found and released, swung outward like the cover of a vast book, revealing a narrow passage behind, brick-lined, dusty, lit by a single bare bulb that had long since burned out. The passage ran parallel to the corridor outside the dressing room, connecting, as we discovered by following it with electric torches, to a storeroom 2 doors down. A storeroom that was accessible from the backstage area, and that was, crucially, not locked. So, Poirot said, standing in the passage with dust on his patent leather shoes and satisfaction on his face, our murderer enters through the storeroom, passes along this hidden corridor, opens the mirror from behind, administers the poison, arranges the body, writes or plants the note, exits the same way, and closes the mirror. The dressing room door remains bolted from inside, a perfect locked room, but only if you do not know about the passage. Who would know about it? I asked. That, mon ami, is the question that will lead us to the killer. By the following morning, the news of Marguerite Essen's death had engulfed London. The papers screamed it from every stand. Stage queen found dead. Tragedy at the Royale. Poison claims London's greatest actress. The more restrained journals spoke of a loss to British theatre. The less restrained ones printed photographs, speculation, and the kind of breathless prose that treats death as entertainment. Poirot read them all, seated at the breakfast table in Whitehaven Mansions, his chocolate cooling beside him, his expression that of a man sifting soil for gold. They all assume suicide, he said. The troubled genius, the tortured artist. It is a narrative the press adores because it requires no investigation, only adjectives. But we know it wasn't suicide. We suspect it was not. The hidden passage makes murder possible, but possibility is not proof. We must now establish who had the means, the motive, and the knowledge. He folded the last paper and set it aside. Today, Hastings, we enter the world of the theatre. It is a world of masks, of roles, of people who are professionally trained to be someone other than themselves. We must be very careful not to applaud when we should be analyzing. Our first visit was to the Royal Theatre itself, where the atmosphere was one of stunned grief shot through with the particular self-consciousness of people who know they are now characters in a drama, rather than performers of one. The theatre manager, a Mr. Cecil Houghton, received us in his office. a cramped room above the box office that smelled of cigar smoke and anxiety. He was a small, fussy man of 50, his hair retreating from his forehead as though fleeing the perpetual crisis of theatrical management. "Dreadful business," he said for perhaps the 4th time. "Absolutely dreadful. Marguerite was the heart of this company. Without her—" He trailed off, gazing at the framed playbills on his wall, each one featuring Essen's name in letters larger than anyone else's. "Mr. Houghton, I wish to know about the hidden passage behind the dressing room mirror." Houghton blinked. "The what?" "A passage connecting the dressing room to the storeroom, concealed behind the mirror." I had no idea such a thing existed. The theater was rebuilt in 1898. There have been renovations since, of course, but I've been manager for 12 years and I've never heard of any hidden passage. Who might know of it? Houghton thought. The stage carpenter, perhaps. Old Brennan. He's been here since before the war. Knows every inch of the building, and the original architect's plans would be on file with the council, I suppose. I shall want to speak with Mr. Brennan. But first, tell me about Marguerite Essen, her state of mind in recent weeks. Houghton's expression shifted, from bewilderment to something more guarded. She was difficult. More difficult than usual, I should say, and Marguerite was never easy. She was a perfectionist, which is what made her brilliant, but it also made her exhausting. In the past month, she'd become positively impossible. She threatened to walk out of the production 3 times. She refused to rehearse with Desmond. That's Desmond Kirby, our leading man. She accused the lighting designer of sabotage. She told me the theater was haunted. Haunted. She said she'd seen something in the mirror. In that damned great mirror in her dressing room. She said someone was watching her from behind the glass. I assumed she was being theatrical, which, being Marguerite, was rather like accusing a fish of being wet. But she seemed genuinely frightened. When did she first mention this? About 3 weeks ago, she came to me white as a sheet, trembling, and said, "Cecil, there is something behind that mirror. I've seen it move." I went down to the dressing room, looked at the mirror, saw nothing but my own face. Rather less impressive than Marguerite's, I grant you, and told her she'd been working too hard. And after that, she became worse, erratic. She started locking her dressing room door during performances. She'd never done that before. She refused to have anyone in the room while she was preparing. She began arriving at the theater very early and leaving very late, as though she were watching for something. Or someone. Poirot was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who had access to Marguerite Essen's dressing room?" "In theory, only Marguerite and a dresser," Rose Harding. "In practice, well, it's a theater. People are in and out. The stage manager, the wardrobe mistress, other actors collecting props or costumes. The door was usually open during the day. And the storeroom at the other end of the passage? Anyone backstage could access it. It's where we keep old props, furniture, set pieces. It's never locked." The picture that was forming was both troubling and suggestive. Someone had discovered the hidden passage, perhaps recently, perhaps long ago, and had used it to watch Marguerite Essen through the 2-way properties of the old glass. She had sensed the watcher. She had been terrified. And then she had been killed. But by whom? And why? The cast of suspects, when Poirot assembled it, was worthy of one of Essen's own productions. First, there was Desmond Kirby, the leading man. He was 40, handsome in a slightly ravaged way, with the kind of presence that fills a room and the kind of ego that demands it. He and Essen had been lovers. This was common knowledge in the theater world. And the affair had ended badly 6 months ago. Since the break, their professional relationship had deteriorated into open warfare. Kirby had publicly called Essen a tyrant in silk at a press reception. Essen had responded by demanding he be replaced. Houghton had refused. Second was Rose Harding, the dresser, a quiet woman of 45 who had attended Essen for 8 years. She knew the actress's habits, her moods, her secrets. She had been the last person, other than the killer, to see Essen alive. She had brought the whiskey, or so she said. Third was Julian Frome, the director of the current production, a young, intense man of 32 who was staging Ibsen's Hedda Gabler with what critics called visionary brilliance and what the actors called lunatic perfectionism. He and Essen had clashed repeatedly over the interpretation of the role. Frome wanted Hedda cold and controlled. Essen wanted her passionate and broken. Their arguments, according to the company, had become increasingly personal. Fourth was Oliver Brennan, the ancient stage carpenter, 70 if he was a day, stooped and grizzled, who had worked at the Royale since 1903 and who, as Houghton had suggested, knew every beam, every trapdoor, every secret of the old building. And fifth, and this was the person who interested Poirot most, was a woman named Claudia Voss. She was Essen's understudy. She had performed the role of Hedda Gabler on the night Essen died, stepping in when the leading lady failed to appear for the final act. She was 30, blonde where Essen was dark, precise where Essen was volcanic, and by all accounts, a gifted actress in her own right. Gifted, but perpetually overshadowed. The understudy, Poirot murmured as we left the theatre. Always she waits in the wings. Always she knows the lines, the blocking, the business. She is the shadow of the star, and shadows, Hastings. They can grow very dark indeed. Poirot conducted his interviews not at the theatre, but at Whitehaven Mansions, on the theory that people are more truthful when removed from the scene of their lies. Each witness was brought to our sitting room, offered tea or coffee, and subjected to the quiet, devastating attention of Hercule Poirot. Rose Harding came first. She was a plain woman with steady hands and careful eyes, the kind of person who notices everything and volunteers nothing. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, and her clothes were the serviceable gray of someone who spent her life making other people look extraordinary. "You brought the whiskey to Mademoiselle Essen's dressing room on the night she died," Poirot said. "No, sir. That's what I've been trying to tell Inspector Miller. I did not bring whiskey. I brought her usual, a cup of chamomile tea. I left it on the dressing table at 9:30 just before the third act. She was in the wings, waiting for her entrance." "And the whiskey glass found beside her body?" "I have no idea where it came from. Marguerite did not drink whiskey. She had a horror of it. Her father was, well, he drank. That's all I'll say about that. Then someone else brought the whiskey, or it was already in the room. There was a bottle in the dressing room. Desmond Kirby left it there weeks ago. He liked to nip between scenes. Marguerite was furious. She told me to throw it out, but I put it in the cupboard instead because it seemed a waste. It was expensive stuff. So the bottle was accessible to anyone who knew the cupboard's contents. I suppose so. But the glass, the crystal tumbler, that wasn't from the theatre. Our glasses are plain. That tumbler was heavy, cut glass. Someone brought it in specially. This was a significant detail. Poirot filed it with visible satisfaction. "Now, Rose, the mirror. Mademoiselle Essen spoke to Mr. Houghton about seeing something behind the glass. Did she speak of it to you?" Rose's composure faltered. She looked down at her hands, those steady, capable hands, and I saw them tremble. She spoke of it constantly. At first I thought it was nerves. The production was difficult. Julian Frome was pushing her hard, and the break with Desmond had left her raw. But then she said something that made me believe her. "What did she say?" She said, "Rose, I looked in the mirror last Tuesday night after the performance, and there was a face behind mine. Not a reflection, a face. It was there for a moment, and then it was gone." She described it as pale, indistinct, like something seen through frosted glass. She was shaking when she told me. And you believed her. I believed she was frightened. Whether there was truly something behind the mirror, I didn't know. Not then. Now, of course, with the passage. She trailed off. Someone was watching her. Someone stood in that passage and watched her through the glass. For weeks. That's not a ghost. That's something worse. Desmond Kirby arrived next, exuding the particular combination of charm and self-regard that Poirot found so instructive in suspects. He was taller than I expected. Stage actors often shrink off the boards. With deep-set eyes, a theatrical jaw, and the restless energy of a man who is always performing, even when the audience is too. I loved Marguerite, he said, settling into the armchair as though it were a throne. I know what people say, that we fought, that the affair ended badly. Both true, but love and fighting are not incompatible. Ask any Italian, or any Belgian. Poirot said dryly, "Tell me about the ending of the affair." Kirby's expression darkened. She ended it. Not because she stopped caring, but because she couldn't tolerate anyone being close to her. Marguerite was brilliant, but she was also profoundly damaged. Her childhood was, well, her father drank. Her mother left. She grew up in a succession of boarding houses and theatrical digs. The stage was the only place she felt safe, and even there, she was constantly afraid that someone would see through the performance to the real woman beneath. And the real woman, what was she like? Frightened, angry, lonely. She pushed everyone away because she believed, absolutely believed, that if anyone truly knew her, they would leave. So she left first. She left me before I could leave her, which I had no intention of doing. You were angry, furious, and hurt. I said some unforgivable things publicly, which I regret, but kill her? No. Whatever I felt about Marguerite, and I felt everything, that was the problem, I would never have harmed her. You left a bottle of whiskey in her dressing room. Weeks ago, she threw a fit about it. Rose was supposed to bin it. The bottle remained. The whiskey in it may have been used to deliver the poison. Kirby went very still. You're saying someone used my whiskey too? I am saying that the bottle you left was accessible and that someone made use of it. The coincidence is unfortunate for you. It wasn't a coincidence. I left that bottle because I was drinking too much. Marguerite's rejection, it hit me harder than I like to admit. I was having a nip between scenes to steady my nerves. She found out and went volcanic. Standard Marguerite. One more question. The hidden passage behind the mirror. Did you know of its existence? Kirby shook his head. Never. I've been at the Royale for 3 productions and I had no idea. But I'll tell you who might have. Julian Frome. He spent weeks studying the theater's architecture before the production began. He's obsessive about sight lines, acoustics, the relationship between the audience and the stage. If anyone found a hidden passage, it would be Julian. Julian Frome, when he appeared, was as different from Kirby as chalk from cheese. Where Kirby was expansive, Frome was contained. Where Kirby performed, Frome observed. He was thin, bespectacled, with the pallor of a man who lived indoors and the intensity of a man who lived inside his own head. Marguerite Essen was the greatest actress I have ever directed, he said, without preliminary. She was also the most infuriating. She refused to trust the text. She imposed her emotions on Hedda rather than discovering Hedda's emotions. We argued about this constantly. Violently. Passionately. There is a difference, though I accept that from outside it may look the same. Our arguments were about art, Monsieur Poirot. About the truth of the character. They were not personal. Mademoiselle Essen felt otherwise, I think. Frome's jaw tightened. Marguerite felt everything as personal. It was her gift and her curse. She could not separate the work from the self. When I criticized Hedda, she heard criticism of Marguerite. When I pushed for a colder interpretation, she heard rejection. You studied the theater's architecture before the production. Exhaustively. The Royale is a fascinating building. The sight lines from certain seats are compromised by the boxes. The acoustics in the upper circle are peculiar. I spent weeks mapping every angle. And during this study, did you discover the hidden passage behind the dressing room mirror? Frome hesitated. The hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but it was the most revealing 2 seconds of the day. Yes, he said. The room went very quiet. I found it 6 weeks ago. The original architect's plans are held at the London County Council offices. I requested them for my production research. The passage was marked on the 1898 plans as a service corridor, apparently used by stagehands to move between dressing rooms without passing through the public areas. It was sealed off during renovations in 1923, but the seal was never permanent, just a thin partition that crumbled years ago. And you told no one? I told Brennan, the stage carpenter. He said he'd always suspected there was something behind that wall. He'd noticed the draft, and He stopped. You what, Monsieur Frome? I used the passage to observe Marguerite's performance preparation. The confession dropped into the silence like a match into petrol. You watched her, I said, through the mirror. Not in any prurient sense. Frome's voice was tight, defensive. I am a director. My job is to understand my actors. Marguerite's preparation ritual, the way she transformed herself into Hedda, was extraordinary. She would sit before that mirror for 40 minutes before every performance. She talked to herself. She argued with the character. She wept sometimes. She built the performance in layers, like a painter building color. I wanted to understand that process. I wanted to see what she did when she believed no one was watching. Because that is when the truth emerges, Poirot said softly. Exactly. And she saw you. She saw something, a movement perhaps, a shadow. The glass is old and the backing is imperfect. In certain light, if someone stands close enough on the other side, there is a faint distortion visible from the front. She noticed it. She became frightened. She told Houghton the mirror was haunted. I should have confessed then. I should have told her what I'd done. Why didn't you? Because she would have destroyed me. Professionally, personally, completely. Marguerite could be vindictive when she felt violated, and what I did, watching her without her knowledge, she would have seen it as the worst kind of betrayal. The trust between a director and an actress is sacred. I violated it, and so you remained silent, and her fear grew. Yes, to my lasting shame, yes. Monsieur Frome, I must ask you directly, did you kill Marguerite Essen? No. The word came fast, raw. I watched her. I invaded her privacy. I'm guilty of that. But I did not kill her. I admired her too much, even when she was impossible. Especially when she was impossible. She was magnificent. The theater without Marguerite Essen is a duller, smaller place, and I would give anything to undo what happened. After Frome left, Poirot sat in silence for a long time. Well, I said, he's confessed to being the watcher behind the mirror. He knew about the passage. He had access. He had motive. She was threatening to leave the production, which would have ruined him professionally. All true. And yet what? And yet the man who watched Marguerite Essen through the mirror for 6 weeks could have killed her at any time. Why wait? Why choose the night of a performance, with hundreds of people in the building and the maximum likelihood of discovery? Panic? Opportunity? A man who plans an elaborate poisoning, plants a suicide note, and stages a locked room mystery does not act from panic. This was calculated. Cold. And the whiskey. You heard Rose Harding. Essen did not drink whiskey. A man who had watched her for 6 weeks would know this. He would never choose whiskey as the vehicle for poison, because he would know she would refuse it. Then who? Patience, Hastings. We have 2 more witnesses to hear. Oliver Brennan had to be fetched in a taxi. He was too old and too stubborn to come willingly, and he arrived at Whitehaven Mansions with the air of a man being escorted to his own execution. He was 73, stooped with hands like gnarled oak roots and eyes that retained a startling sharpness, despite the general dilapidation of the rest of him. He had worked at the Royal Theatre for 46 years. He had built sets for Irving, for Tree, for every great name of the English stage. He regarded the modern theatre with the contempt of a man who remembered when things were done properly. "I know about the passage," he said, before Poirot had asked a single question. "Known about it for 30 years. Found it in '06 when I was replacing a section of wall behind the storeroom. The brickwork was different, newer than the rest. I knocked through and there it was. A corridor running behind the dressing rooms, all the way from the storeroom to the old scene dock." "And you told no one?" "I told the manager at the time, Mr. Philpott. He said it was a nuisance and to seal it up. I plastered over the opening in the storeroom but left the mirror end alone because the mirror was too heavy to move and too valuable to risk damaging. I figured nobody would find the other end if I sealed my end. But the plaster did not hold. Plaster never holds in a theatre. The vibrations from the stage, the heating pipes, the damp, everything conspires against permanence. The patch crumbled years ago. I kept meaning to redo it. Never did." Who else knew about the passage? Brennan scratched his chin. "Mr. Frome found out from the architect's plans. Came to me about it 6 weeks back. I told him it was sealed. He looked for himself and discovered it wasn't. Anyone else? There was one other." Brennan's expression shifted, became wary, reluctant. "Miss Voss? Claudia Voss. She asked me about it 2 months ago. The understudy. She'd been poking around the storeroom. Said she was looking for a prop, a hand mirror for the production. She noticed the patch in the wall where my plaster had crumbled and asked what was behind it. I told her it was an old service corridor, nothing interesting. She didn't push it, but she had a look in her eye. Curious, you know. The kind of look that means someone's coming back for another look when you're not around." Poirot nodded slowly. "And did she come back?" "Couldn't say for certain. But I noticed the opening had been widened a few weeks later. Someone had cleared away more of the old plaster. It wasn't me, and it wasn't Frome. He told me he used the mirror end." The final interview was with Claudia Voss herself. She entered our sitting room with the composure of a woman who had been expecting this conversation and had prepared for it. She was, as I had been told, fair-haired and precise, pretty rather than beautiful, with fine features and a controlled grace that suggested discipline rather than nature. She sat, declined tea, and folded her hands in her lap. "You want to know if I killed Marguerite," she said. "Everyone does. The understudy who benefits from the star's death. It's practically a cliché." "Clichés," Poirot observed, "become clichés because they contain a residue of truth. You did benefit, Mademoiselle Voss. You performed Hedda Gabler on the night of Marguerite Essen's death. The reviews this morning are extraordinarily favorable." "I didn't read them." "No. A woman who has waited 3 years in the shadow of a greater talent does not read the reviews on the morning she finally steps into the light? Forgive me, mademoiselle, but I find that difficult to believe." A flush crept up Claudia's neck. "All right, I read them. And yes, they were good. Better than good. The Telegraph called me a revelation. The Observer said I brought to Hedda a precision that Essen, for all her fire, had never achieved. Do you know what it's like to read those words after 3 years of being invisible? I can imagine. No, you can't. You're Hercule Poirot. You've never been invisible in your life." The words carried a bitterness that was, I thought, not entirely about the theatre. "The hidden passage," Poirot said. "You knew about it." Claudia was silent for a moment. Then, "I found it by accident. 2 months ago. I was in the storeroom looking for a prop and I noticed the damaged plaster. I pulled some away and found the corridor. I followed it and discovered it led to the back of the dressing room mirror. And then I looked through the glass. Marguerite was sitting at her dressing table, preparing for the evening performance. She was talking to herself. To the mirror, really. She was saying, "You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. They'll see through you eventually." Over and over, the most celebrated actress in England, telling her reflection she was a fraud. Claudia's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. I stood there, watching, and I felt, I don't know how to describe it. Pity, horror, recognition. Because I say the same things to myself every night before I go on. Every understudy does. And suddenly, Marguerite Essen wasn't this untouchable goddess of the stage. She was just a frightened woman in a locked room, begging a mirror to tell her she was enough. Did you continue to watch? Twice more. I'm not proud of it. The third time she noticed a flicker, a shadow. She screamed. I ran. After that, I sealed up my end of the passage with an old stage flat and never went back. You sealed it. When? 3 weeks ago, the same day she told Houghton the mirror was haunted. And on the night she died. Where were you? In my dressing room, upstairs, preparing as I always do in case I'm needed. When the call came that Marguerite hadn't appeared for the final act, I went on. I performed. And when I came off stage, when they told me she was dead, I felt. She stopped. Her composure, which had held throughout, cracked in a single fissure. I felt relief. God help me. For one terrible moment, I felt relieved. Not that she was dead. I didn't know she was dead yet. I thought she'd simply left. But I was relieved to be on that stage. To be seen. To be, for once, the one they were watching. And then they told me she was dead. And the relief turned to something else. Guilt. Because I'd wished for this. Not her death. Never that, but her absence. I'd wished to step out of the shadow, and now the shadow was gone, and I couldn't feel anything clean about it. After she left, I sat in silence, turning the testimonies over in my mind. Poirot, I said finally. Frome watched her through the mirror. Claudia watched her through the mirror. Who else might have? That is what troubles me, Hastings. 2 watchers that we know of. But the passage was accessible to anyone who discovered the damaged plaster in the storeroom. And the storeroom was never locked. You think there was a third watcher. I think, mon ami, that the thing behind the mirror was not one thing but many things, and the thing that killed Marguerite Essen may have been watching longest of all. The break in the case came, as breaks so often do, not from deduction, but from a detail so small it might have been overlooked entirely. Poirot had requested that Inspector Miller send him the complete inventory of items found in Marguerite Essen's dressing room. The list was long. Cosmetics, costumes, scripts, personal effects, the accumulated possessions of a woman who spent more of her life in that room than in her own home. Poirot read the list 3 times. On the 3rd reading, he stopped. Hastings, item 47. I looked. 1 crystal tumbler, cut glass, containing residue of whiskey and potassium cyanide. Not that. Item 47. 1 silver photograph frame, empty, found in the wastebasket. Empty, Poirot repeated. An empty photograph frame in the wastebasket. Someone removed a photograph and threw away the frame, or someone removed the frame and kept the photograph. Either way, a photograph was separated from its frame on the night of the murder. Why? Perhaps it was already broken. Perhaps she threw it away days ago. The wastebasket was emptied every evening by the cleaning staff. Rose Harding confirmed this. Whatever was in that basket was placed there on the day of the death. And the frame? He consulted the list again. Silver, hallmarked, expensive. One does not throw away a silver frame on a whim. He telephoned Rose Harding. The conversation was brief. "The photograph," he said, replacing the receiver. "Rose remembers it. It sat on the dressing table for as long as she had worked there. A photograph of two young women, Marguerite and another woman, taken perhaps 20 years ago. Rose did not know the other woman's identity. Marguerite never spoke of her. And the photograph itself, where is it? Not in the dressing room, not among Essen's personal effects. It has vanished." Poirot stood. There was a new energy about him, the quickened pulse of a man whose grey cells have seized upon something essential. "Hastings, we must discover the identity of the woman in that photograph. It is the key." "I'm certain of it." This proved easier than expected. A visit to Marguerite Essen's flat in Bloomsbury, a handsome but disordered apartment crammed with books, theatrical memorabilia, and the detritus of a life lived at high intensity, yielded a collection of old photographs in a shoebox at the bottom of a wardrobe. Among them was a duplicate of the missing image. Two young women, perhaps 20 years old, standing arm in arm outside a building I recognized as RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. One was unmistakably a young Marguerite Essen, her dark hair loose, her smile unguarded in a way that the later famous Marguerite never allowed herself. The other was fair-haired, slender, with fine features and a smile that matched Marguerite's in warmth. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, Marguerite and Sybil, RADA, 1913, sisters in all but blood. "Sybil," Poirot murmured. "We must find this Sybil." It did not take long. A search through RADA's records, facilitated by Inspector Miller's authority, revealed that Sybil Moorhouse had been a student alongside Marguerite Essen in 1912 and 1913. She had been considered exceptionally talented. She had won the Academy's gold medal for her final year performance, and then she had vanished from the theatrical world entirely. She married, the RADA registrar told us, consulting dusty files, a Mr. Thomas Voss in 1915. After that, we have no further record. Voss. I looked at Poirot. He looked at me. "Claudia Voss," I breathed. "Sybil Moorhouse is Claudia's mother, and Marguerite Essen's closest friend, her sister in all but blood." Poirot's voice was very quiet. A woman who gave up the stage, who abandoned a brilliant career, while her friend went on to become the most celebrated actress in England. Imagine, Hastings, the weight of that, the what might have been. And then imagine the daughter, raised in the shadow of her mother's abandoned dream, becoming an understudy to the very woman her mother once stood beside as an equal. Good God! Do you think Claudia knew? I think it is time we found out. But first, Poirot made one more visit. He returned to the Royal Theatre, alone, and spent an hour in the hidden passage behind the mirror. When he emerged, his shoes were dusty, his expression was grave, and he carried in his hand a small object that he showed me without comment. It was a handkerchief, lace-edged, monogrammed. The initials, embroidered in lilac thread, were S.M. Sybil Moorhouse. Poirot assembled the suspects in the theatre itself. It was his preference, he said, to reveal the truth in the place where it had been concealed. The setting was the auditorium, empty now, the vast space echoing with the ghosts of 1,000 performances. The seats stretched away into darkness. The stage was bare, lit by a single working light that cast harsh shadows. They sat in the front row. Rose Harding, Desmond Kirby, Julian Frome, Oliver Brennan, Claudia Voss. Inspector Miller stood in the wings. I sat slightly behind Poirot, notebook ready, and in the second row, brought at Poirot's specific request, was an elderly woman I had not previously seen. She was frail, white-haired, and she sat very straight, her hands clasped around the handle of a walking stick. Her eyes, pale blue and remarkably sharp, were fixed on the empty stage. Claudia Voss, when she saw the woman, went white. "Mama," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" Sybil Morehouse, Sybil Voss, said nothing. She looked at her daughter with an expression of such complex tenderness that I felt I was intruding on something deeply private. Poirot stood on the stage, alone in that pool of light, and began. In every mystery, there is a moment when the detective sees the pattern. Not the facts. The facts are available to everyone. But the pattern, the design beneath the surface, the thing that connects what appears random into what is deliberate. For me, that moment came when I found a handkerchief in the passage behind the mirror. He produced the lace handkerchief from his pocket, monogrammed S.M. Sybil Morehouse, a handkerchief belonging to a woman who was Marguerite Essen's closest friend at RADA, who gave up the stage to marry and raise a family, and whose daughter sits among you tonight. All eyes turned to Claudia, who sat rigid, her face bloodless. But I did not understand the full significance until I considered the photograph. The missing photograph from Marguerite's dressing room, two young women, arms linked, standing outside the academy where they trained together. That photograph sat on Marguerite's dressing table for 20 years. On the night she died, it was removed from its frame and taken. The frame was discarded in the wastebasket. The photograph itself vanished. He paused, letting the silence work. Why would a murderer take a photograph? Not for money. The silver frame was more valuable. Not to destroy evidence. The photograph connected no one to the crime. Unless the photograph itself was the motive. Unless the relationship it depicted, the bond between Marguerite Essen and Sybil Morehouse, was at the heart of everything. He turned to face the elderly woman in the second row. "Madame Voss, you came to the theater on the night Marguerite Essen died. You entered through the stage door at 7:15, using a pass that your daughter had obtained for you. You told the doorman you were visiting Claudia, but you did not go to Claudia's dressing room. You went to the storeroom. You knew about the hidden passage because your daughter had told you about it weeks earlier, and you walked through that passage to the mirror behind which Marguerite Essen sat preparing for her performance." Sybil Voss's hands tightened on her walking stick, but she did not speak. You had come to see her, not to harm her. You had not seen Marguerite in over 20 years, not since the friendship ended, abruptly and painfully, in 1916, when Marguerite chose to pursue her career while you chose marriage and motherhood. You had written to her many times over the years. She never replied. You had attended her performances from the back of the stalls, watching the woman you loved like a sister become someone you no longer recognized. And when Claudia became her understudy, when your daughter entered the orbit of the woman who had been your dearest friend and your deepest wound, you could not stay away. "Stop!" The voice came from Claudia, sharp and raw. "Please, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you're going to say, my mother had nothing to do with this. Your mother, mademoiselle, had everything to do with this, but not in the way you fear." Poirot stepped to the edge of the stage. "Let me tell you what happened on the night Marguerite Essen died, and I warn you, the truth is not what any of you expect." Sybil Voss entered the passage at approximately 7:30. She intended to watch Marguerite's preparation, to see one last time the face of the friend she had lost. But when she reached the mirror, she found that someone had been there before her. He turned to Frome. "Monsieur Frome, you told me you had stopped watching Marguerite through the mirror after she became frightened. This was a lie." You continued. "On the night of her death, you were in the passage at 7 o'clock, half an hour before Sybil arrived. You watched Marguerite prepare. You saw her growing agitation, her fear, and you saw something else." Frome had gone rigid. "You saw Marguerite write the note that was found beside her body. She wrote it at her dressing table before the performance began, while you watched from behind the glass. She was not writing a suicide note. She was writing a confession." "A confession of what?" Kirby demanded. "Of the thing behind the mirror. Of the thing she had done." Poirot descended from the stage and stood before them, his small figure commanding in a way that had nothing to do with stature. 20 years ago, at RADA, Marguerite Essen and Sybil Morehouse competed for the gold medal. Both were brilliant. Both were expected to have extraordinary careers. The medal was awarded to Sybil, and Marguerite, consumed by jealousy, by the terror of being second best, did something unforgivable. He paused. She wrote an anonymous letter to the Academy's board, accusing Sybil of plagiarism. She fabricated evidence. The accusation was investigated, and though Sybil was ultimately cleared, the scandal destroyed her confidence and her reputation within the profession. No London theatre would hire her. She married, retreated from public life, and spent the next 20 years in obscurity, watching from the shadows, while Marguerite became the star she herself might have been. Claudia made a sound. Not a word, just a small, wounded exhalation. Marguerite carried this guilt for 2 decades. It was the thing behind the mirror. Not a ghost, not a watcher, but her own conscience reflected back at her every time she sat before that glass. When she sensed a presence in the passage, when she felt she was being watched, it was not merely fear of an intruder. It was the terror of being seen for what she truly was, a woman who had built her career on the ruins of her closest friends. "The note," I said. "I cannot bear it any longer. The thing behind the mirror knows what I have done." Precisement, not a suicide note, a confession written in a moment of unbearable guilt, intended perhaps for Sybil herself, perhaps for no one. But someone found it, someone read it, and someone saw in it an opportunity. Poirot turned very slowly to Rose Harding. The dresser had not moved throughout. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, those careful, watchful eyes, had changed. There was something in them now that I had not seen before. Not fear, not guilt exactly. Something colder. "Rose," Poirot said gently. Rose Harding, who was born Rose Morehouse. Sybil's younger sister, Marguerite Essen's dresser for 8 years. The woman who knew every habit, every routine, every secret. The woman who brought the chamomile tea and who knew about the whiskey in the cupboard and who had a key to the storeroom and who had known about the hidden passage since Brennan first found it in 1906. Because Brennan told the manager, Mr. Philpott, and Mr. Philpott mentioned it, as people do, and the information found its way, as information does, to those who needed it. Rose Harding looked at him. Her face was very calm. "You watched your sister's life destroyed by Marguerite Essen's jealousy. You watched Sybil retreat into marriage, into silence, into the quiet despair of a talent wasted. And then, 8 years ago, you took a position as Marguerite's dresser, not for the salary, not for the glamour, but to be close to the woman who had ruined your family, to watch her, to wait. You waited 8 years, Rose. 8 years of brushing her hair, pressing her costumes, bringing her tea. 8 years of servitude to the woman you hated more than anyone on earth. That is a patience beyond anything I've encountered. It is terrifying in its discipline." And then the passage was rediscovered, first by Brennan's old repair crumbling away, then by Claudia, who innocently told her mother, who told you, and you realized that you had not only access and motive, but a mechanism, the locked room, the mirror, the thing behind the glass. Rose spoke at last. Her voice was steady as stone. She never once recognized me. 8 years I stood behind her and she never saw me. I was invisible, the dresser, the servant. Not once did she look at me and see Sybil's sister, the girl who used to sit in the audience at RADA and watch her sister shine. She destroyed Sybil, not with a knife, not with poison, with words, a letter, a lie. And Sybil was too gentle, too honest, too trusting to fight back. She just folded. She stopped acting, she stopped laughing, she stopped being the person she was. And you could not forgive that. Could you? The question hung in the air. Poirot did not answer it. On the night of the murder, he continued, you entered the passage from the